Welcome to Lit Vibes Only, where we lit the shit out of books we love and hate. I'm Amanda.
And I'm Kelsey. And we would love it if you came to engage with us
Like, where's she inviting us? Where are we taking them?
on our socials. So especially on TikTok and Instagram. On Instagram, you can find us at litvibesonly_podcast. And on TikTok, you can find us at litvibesonly podcast. And we also upload video episodes on YouTube. So you can also find us on YouTube at litvibesonly podcast. So come engage
Come watch
with
us and see what we do while we're recording.
Yeah.
We're all over the place.
Me wearing all of my Taylor Swift merch.
So much merch.
All the time.
We get it. Okay.
And the weird faces that we make and stuff.
Yes. And the fact that I was going to say the fact that we can't sit still, but honestly, I am quite impressed with us. I feel like
you do a really good job.
You too.
I don't know.
I feel like you don't fidget that much. Like I like, you can't see. I'm like fidgeting under the table and like.
Yeah. No, I feel like my eyes can't stay on
same.
I'm just like, I'm like, what is this? Oh, look at this thing.
While you're talking. It's also hard for me. This is a tangent, but it made me think of it. Like when I am having a conversation with someone, it's really hard for me to like maintain eye contact, and not because I'm like afraid or shy. Like I just, my eyes just are constantly noticing everything else and looking out the window. I really struggle with that. And
like in our last episode, when we started, I was like looking at stuff out here, and then we had a really bad window. We had a really bad storm not that long ago, right? And there's a house right next to us, and there's a bunch of branches on their roof still. And I was like, oh, interesting. Like
they haven't taken this down yet. No, I was looking out the window multiple times in the previous episode because it helps me to think too if I'm not looking at someone and trying to maintain eye contact while I'm thinking aloud. I need to like look at something else while I process. Yeah. So if you are watching these video episodes and you're like, their eye contact is horrible, that's probably why.
That's why. We're not very good at it.
So maybe you should just listen to this. Maybe we should just shut down our YouTube channel.
Hey, and even though we are no longer giving away stickers for reviews, you should still go on Apple or Spotify. Those are like the main platforms.
Yeah.
Go review us. Go rate us. Please. We need all the love we can get so we can get going already.
Yes.
We need a bigger following, y'all.
It's just like a great way for people to interact with us, especially on Spotify, because you can comment on each episode. So if you have like strong thoughts and feelings about a particular episode, you can go to that episode and leave them there and we'll see them. We look every single week. We get notifications. So we know when y'all are writing things. So please do that. That's a good reminder. Now that we're not doing this sticker giveaway anymore, I feel like we forget to tell people to keep rating and reviewing, but please do that.
Keep going over there.
Yes.
We need it.
Yes. But yeah, speaking of doing things for others, it's tis the season. It is the holiday season. It is Christmas week. This will be dropping on the 23rd.
That's crazy.
So Christmas Eve's Eve, the eve of Christmas Eve, whatever.
Look at you getting tripped over your words like you're a Kelsey or something.
Oh, I know. We're just gonna it's not gonna be a verb now. I'm just Kelseying over here. just did a Kelsey. But for us right now, it is the Friday after Thanksgiving that we're recording this. Yeah. So it is like full on Black Friday, everything, all the Black Friday deals, and prepping for the Christmas holidays.
Yeah. And if you can tell, we're also recording a different time of the day. So it's much darker in our situation.
Like turning on all the lights.
Trying to.
Yeah. It's so sad. It's like what? It's 4:15 right now. And
oh my God. Don't remind me.
Like this is not even the shortest day yet. We still have like a month to get to the shortest day of the year. I know. So it's going to be, I hate that.
That's so bad.
I know. Which is why we should be focusing on happy things like Christmas presents. Have you started your Christmas shopping?
I don't really celebrate Christmas in that way. So there at school, I like to do like, what do we call it? Like the secret snowflake. I oversee what's called ASB, and that's like the student leadership. You probably know what it is.
Yep.
just for our listeners. And so we have like elected students that are in ASB, and we call it Secret Snowflake because in public school, you can't call it like Secret Santa.
So weird. So
But it's
weird.
like literally the same thing. So whatever,
Yeah.
I don't know how we can even get away with that, but it's literally the same thing. And the kids were like, "What? We want Miss May and Miss the other teachers to be involved too." And so we're going to do that with them. It's super cute. They're
That is
adorable.
cute.
I love working with them. They're so fun. And then the school, the teachers at the school and the staff, like you can sign up to do like a secret snowflake, and you pick one person or you get one person, and like you get a list of all the things that they enjoy and stuff. And
Mm-hmm.
then you shower them with gifts throughout the last week of school.
Oh,
It's
multiple
fun.
gifts.
So that's fun.
Yeah, that
And
is
there's no
fun.
like cap or anything. You just do
Yeah.
what you want.
Oh, nice. Yeah,
So
we
yeah.
didn't do any sort of gift giving at my school. We used to, the like parent association would put together gift baskets for all of us, but then they decided starting last year that it was like too expensive, and so now we don't get anything, which is like
so sad.
so sad.
Oh
Like literally
no.
nothing. And technically the students aren't allowed to give us gifts either. So
Uh-huh.
every now and then you'll get a student who like will bring you, you know, a Starbucks gift card or like maybe some chocolate or something. But yeah, it is
Uh-huh.
kind of sad because I've
Oh.
never been at a school where like you don't get gifts or like a gift from the school just to say thank you. But we do a secret Santa with my siblings because I have a huge
Okay.
family. I have
Oh
six
yeah.
siblings, and like trying to buy presents
For
for six
everyone.
other siblings and my parents is just 8
That
people
would
and
be a
doesn't even
lot.
start to cover like friends and coworkers.
Uh-huh.
So in the last couple of
Oh my
years, we've
gosh.
done a secret Santa, and I did all of my shopping for my secret Santa because I
There you
wanted to
go.
make the most of these Black Friday deals. So I'm
Uh-huh.
done already with
Holy.
all of my shopping for my secret Santa and for myself. Merry Christmas to me.
Woohoo. Yeah, you were very happy about the things that you got for yourself.
You know, it is being financially sound, wise, frugal to make the most of these Black Friday deals for things.
Yes, I'm
They were
sure.
things I needed. They were not things I just, well, some of them I wanted, but mostly things I needed.
Uh,
So might as well save a buck when I
yeah.
can.
And it's
But yeah.
funny on my end for like actual gift giving. Like I don't really do anything for my family, but my
Mm-hmm.
husband and I will do something for each other.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I'm still deciding. But the tough thing is his birthday is in January, and
Oh,
so
I
I
know.
have to
Mine is
always like
too.
plan ahead.
Mm-hmm.
But yours is really close to Christmas. Like yours is
Trust
the very
me, I
beginning of
know.
January.
It's the
Um,
worst.
but yeah, his is like at the end of January, and we always
Mm.
do something kind of big. And so I can't tell you what it is because it's a surprise, but that would be, I'll tell you guys later.
Okay. Okay. That's fair. But yeah, no, having a January birthday sucks because one, the weather's gross, so nobody ever wants to like go out and do
Yeah.
anything. And two, it's like right after Christmas, everyone's like, well, I just got you,
Yeah.
blah, blah, blah. So I want to get you anything else. And my birthday is
Mm,
January 7th.
yeah.
And everyone's like,
It's
we just got
really
you
close.
presents. And what was worse growing up, one of my siblings, he's born the 2nd and I'm born the 7th. And so we
Oh.
always had to celebrate our birthdays together, even though we're
Oh.
not twins. And I'm like, look, it is tough enough being one of 7. Let me have my one special moment. Okay. Like, why do I have to share everything?
Oh.
So I'm a
Yeah, it
little
was so
bitter.
one of my coworkers has twins, and she said, "Oh yeah, they want different birthdays this year."
Oh
And I
my
was like, "Oh
God.
yeah, like they're in middle school. That makes sense."
That's crazy. But yeah,
Poor
that does
things. Yeah.
track.
They have to have a
Yeah.
birthday together
Yeah. Yep. It's
up
true.
until that point.
Yeah. It's rough. Wow. Oh, well, Merry Christmas to all of you who celebrate as you're
Happy
like happy
holidays
holidays as you're heading
or
into
whatever holiday you celebrate.
whichever holiday or none at all. Maybe this is like not at all your thing, but
Yeah.
we hope you have a great week. Regardless, we hope you have a lovely week. And we're going to do this is now our 3rd Lit Chats episode. I have
So
been really
exciting.
excited for this particular topic
Me
because
too.
I know in general, I think this divides the literary community, the
Oh,
reading community.
100%.
And so I'm excited to dive into it
Be
with
careful what
Kelsey.
you say.
I will say whatever the heck I want to say. So we're going to
I
be
know you will.
talking about, you're like, I know, God. We're going to be talking about audiobooks
Consequences be
today.
damned.
and just some subtopics, I guess, that fall underneath that big umbrella term of audiobooks. And we're going to kick off this discussion with this lovely question, which is, does listening to an audiobook count as reading? Kelsey, why don't you answer first?
Well, duh, it does. You're getting the same content. You are getting the same vocabulary. Like it is, you are reading. Okay. And in my world, it counts as reading. Like I wouldn't go to Goodreads and be like, oh yeah, I didn't read that. I don't know. Like, exactly what happens.
Yeah.
You're going to check it off on Goodreads.
Of course.
Or whatever app you use. What's the other app that's out there? There's one more that's like people rave about, but I use Goodreads right now. But if I'm going to check it off on Goodreads, like I read it, no matter what form I read it in.
Okay. So for you, your criteria is like checking it off on Goodreads means that you read it.
I suppose so.
Okay.
That just came out of my ass. So it wasn't premeditated, by the way.
Okay. I want to the first thing I want to say, just want to establish this right
Amanda,
out the gate.
Sure. What is it?
Is that listening to a book and reading a book are both equally valid, equally acceptable ways of interacting with the text. One is not better than the other. One is not superior. One is not inferior. And I am like completely 100% against people who believe that. Like, I think that is ridiculous. My one caveat, and this is getting really nitty gritty and like into the semantics of things.
Yes, it is.
But
Amanda.
if you've listened to this podcast for any length of time, you know that I love words and I love language. And I really think a lot about the way in which we use words and language and what it means. And so my one thing is that I think if you listened to an audiobook, then you should say that you listened to an audiobook instead of saying that you read a book, purely because reading and listening are two different activities. They're two completely different actions. So I think it's misleading to tell someone that you read a book when you listen to it. Just say that you listened to it. There's nothing wrong with that. It's not shameful. And so
I have a question for you.
Yeah, go for it.
Like, what is the point behind that? Like, what is your point? Like,
for me, it's just
what is your need behind that? Like, you have to distinguish the two.
So I don't think that, again, this is not something I feel strongly about. This is not something that I'm like, oh my gosh, it keeps me up at night. But in the context, if we're going to have like this discussion about it, right, and we're going to like have to dive into the details and the nitty gritty, then I would say for me, it just comes down to like using words or accurately and honestly, like reflecting what you're doing. So for example, if you were like, oh my gosh, Amanda, like I just came back from going for a run and you actually walked, I would feel like you were being dishonest because it isn't actually what you did. Again, one is not better than the other. It just requires, like, it's a completely different action.
One
right?
Sounds better than the other, though.
What? I mean, I think
you went for a run versus a walk.
You think it sounds better?
Yeah. And that's also what people say about listening to audiobooks.
Yes.
There is definitely like a hierarchy.
Yeah.
And when you say that, it makes me feel like that's what you're saying, but then you're saying that's not what you're saying. So
you're making it sound like it's coming across as, oh, well, I'm looking down on you because is that what you're saying?
Not that far, but like that reading is superior to listening to audiobooks. And I know that's
why do you
not
think
what
that?
You're saying, because you have to have a distinguish between them.
But the flip side of that is like, why do then people who listen to audiobooks feel so adamant about saying that they read the book if it doesn't matter?
Because there is like this air of reading is more superior in like our culture.
Yes. Okay. So that's the thing. And we talked about this before. So that's where I think it comes from. And we talked about this earlier today. Like there is this elitism that comes with reading. And historically,
reading in general. Yeah.
In general, like historically, literacy, being able to read was like reserved for the very few. And historically it was men and often white men, but usually men in whatever culture, and women weren't allowed to read, the lower classes weren't allowed to read, etc. So I think it's just permeated, right, deep into our cultural psyche. And so I think without realizing it, a lot of people who listen to audiobooks are then naturally situated to have to defend, right?
Right.
Their intelligence, their ability to interact with
Mm-hmm.
the text, because there is that like underlying, oh yeah, like
Mm-hmm.
oral traditions and listening and speaking versus reading and writing is less than, and
Right.
somehow speaks to a lack of education. It speaks to a lack of, like I said, intellectual capability. So I completely agree with that. And I fully understand why folks who listen to audiobooks are like, no, I need to actually say that I read it, because if I don't, then I'm somehow going to be dismissed, or like my experience of the text is somehow less valid. And I
Mm-hmm.
completely agree. Like we are totally on the same page about that. But I think by
Mm-hmm.
doing that, though, by having people who listen to audiobooks feel like, oh, no, 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 I have to say that I read it, we're just perpetuating that stereotype that one is better than
Mm-hmm.
the other. And I think it's such a really bad example for younger folks and younger readers. Because as teachers, you know this, like when kids struggle to read, whether it's because of a physical disability, whether it's because of a learning difference like dyslexia, maybe they're just slow readers, we don't tell them like it's reading or nothing, right? We're like, oh, here are some alternatives, like you can listen to this.
Mm-hmm.
We provide them with audiobooks in school. Like that
Mm-hmm.
is at least at my school. I'm sure at your school it's the
Yeah, at
same.
my school as well.
And
Mm-hmm.
if they then see adults in their lives that are ashamed to claim that they listen to books versus reading them, like what kind of messaging is it then sending to kids? Both of those things are valid. We're not going to ever undo this problematic hierarchy that is still under the surface if people don't just
Yeah.
like own up to it.
I don't know. I don't think saying reading an audiobook
Mm-hmm.
is portraying that, in my opinion. I don't know.
Mm.
Like for me, I will say both. I don't
Yeah.
have like
Sure, sure, sure.
I only say I read
Mm-hmm.
this audiobook. Oh yeah, I was
Mm-hmm.
listening to this audiobook, da da da. And I do both. So it is an
Mm-hmm.
interchangeable thing for
Mm-hmm.
me. But when I
Mm-hmm.
say it counts as reading,
Yeah, it
right?
does.
Like it's counting towards the books that I have, like I
Yeah,
know what has happened in them.
sure.
Like I've read
Yeah,
them.
absolutely. I,
But
yeah, yeah.
I will say like, oh yeah, I listened to an audiobook. I'll say
Mm-hmm.
that,
Yeah,
but it counts towards my reading.
sure. Sure.
So I don't know. It's very, very thin line that we're
Sure.
walking
Yeah.
and
And I would say
distinguishing between
too,
the
like if
two.
somebody told me that they read an audiobook
Mhm.
versus if they just said that they read a book, that they listened to the audiobook, I think that also is just, again, this is not a huge issue. This is not something that I like get upset about or like at
Other
all.
people do though.
I know, which is like so wild to me. But I do think if someone says that they read an audiobook, like I'm like, okay, I know the format in which you experienced this text because you said audiobook, right? And so it's like,
Sure.
oh, like that's fine. If you want to say you read it, that's fine. But when people
Hmm.
say that they read a book and they listened to the audiobook, just that phrase, I'm like, oh, I'm imagining that you had this particular kind of experience with the text. Again, not in a way that makes it better or worse. I'm just like, oh, then I can then imagine like you have this hardcover or whatever book that you, again, like read because it's a different skill, like a different skill set versus listening. And like I suck at listening. I'm a really poor auditory processor. It's why I don't listen to audiobooks. I find it very hard to track information that way. Does that make me less than? I don't think so. Like, does that mean I'm less intelligent? I don't think so. And so I think it's just a matter of playing to your strengths and like getting to experience the world in a way that best suits you. So yeah, I do think it's silly if people are like, oh my gosh, like you're a
Oh.
fraud if you say that you read an audiobook. Like that just seems really extreme to me and like so narrow-minded. And again, sets are, I think, a bad example for students of all, or just people in general, right? Who like experience the world differently based on, whether they are neurodiverse or whatever.
Uh-huh. When you're talking, I'm like, oh, okay. Yeah, she's saying that audiobooks are valid. And then I'm
Yeah.
like, wait, no, she's not. So like yeah, the way that you're describing this, I cannot tell what
Okay, so
you're
okay,
saying.
so this is
You
a great
might,
like a
I don't know that it will help, Amanda.
this this is a great comprehension check. Kelsey, what do you think I've communicated so far?
Various things. That's why you're like, so audiobooks don't count as reading, they count as listening. And that's kind of That's the problem with people see but it does count as reading.
So I think what I'm trying to say is that listening to an audiobook means that
Mm-hmm.
you listened. You didn't actually engage in the act of reading. However, especially as you were saying, like when you're keeping track of books that you've quote unquote read, like
Yeah.
that is, yeah, that's totally fine. Because as far as I'm aware, there's not some app that's like, let me track the audiobooks I listen. Like that's stupid. But I think there is a distinction between listening and reading. That is what I'm trying to say. I don't think audiobooks are less than a written book, but I think it is important to note, and again, not important to note because one is better than the other, but because there's just a difference. Like listening requires your brain working in a certain way and engaging with something that is very different from reading, and both of them are very cool ways to engage. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense, but
Okay,
it
okay.
still sounds like you're not saying what you're saying. It's like, why do you have to make that distinction? Why is that distinction so important
I
to
don't
you?
have to. That's what I'm saying. I don't have to make that distinction, but I do think like those two things, I'm just like saying that
It's a different
generally. They're
verb. Like literally, that's what we're
Well, it's
talking
not just
about.
it's a different verb because it's a
Yeah.
different action.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
So
who
the way
cares?
that you're processing, I think it only matters in that because of the way that it's talked about, one is given more superiority than the other. And I think that's a bad thing. And I think you should think two things should be acknowledged. One is
Mm-hmm.
they are two different ways of engaging with the text, and they are both valid. That is what I'm saying.
Okay.
And I feel like a
I think
lot
that's
of
a good way to
and
end it.
yeah, and I think a lot of people just think that like they're the same and they're both valid, and that I disagree with because I've
Hmm.
heard people make that argument like listening and reading is the same. I'm like, no, it's not. Like it's not the same thing, and it's okay.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's that built-in defensiveness because they're afraid that they're then being condescended to, or their experience with the
Sure.
text is somehow less than because they listened to it. And so I understand why people get defensive.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's all. So
Um,
hopefully that's clear. I
okay.
don't know how else to say that.
In the end, we're basically saying the same thing,
Yes.
is all that chalks up to. Okay. So, our next question, why do you
Hmm.
choose to or choose not to listen to audiobooks?
Hmm.
You go ahead first.
Yeah, I mean, I've kind of already answered is that I'm not good at processing things that way orally.
Mm.
Part of it's
Mhm.
because I have a disability, like I have single-sided deafness. So generally, just processing sound is a little bit harder for me than other
Mhm.
people. And two, I just find it harder to understand and retain information when it's presented in an auditory format or an audio
Mhm.
format versus text, just because that's how my brain is wired. So I'm like naturally I'm going to be more inclined to go to something that's visual, whether it's pictures, whether it's text, whether it's a video, that is going to stick with me versus
Mhm.
audio. And I also just quite simply, I love the idea of getting in my little reading chair with an actual book that I can wrap my hands around or my e-reader, because unfortunately that's usually what I'm reading, and have something I can hold in my hands and it's just me and the text and physically in that space in that moment. There's just something
Mhm.
really wonderful about that interaction. And I don't have that with an audiobook. I mean, you could curl up with an audiobook. You could have that playing while you sit and listen, but I think you're going to speak to this in a moment. But a lot of times if you're listening to an audiobook, you're doing something else. And so I like having my focus solely on the story that I'm engaging with.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So that's pretty much it for me.
So I do listen to a lot of audiobooks, and I like the idea of being able to do other things while I'm listening to an audiobook. So I like to do it when I'm driving or when I'm working out or when I'm doing chores at home. It just allows me to continue my reading without having to just sit there and read. Because also, like for me, that's really difficult to do because my
Mm,
brain is constantly like
yeah.
on all of the tasks that I need to complete or think that I need to complete, I create in my head.
Mm,
And so audiobooks help me do something while also listening to a book. So that is probably my biggest reason for listening to
Sure.
audiobooks. And plus, like, I'm a slower reader, so I get through books less quickly. And so some people like to read in like just chunks, like they'll read a couple days of one book because they can get through it quickly. And I would love to be that kind of reader, but I don't read that quickly. And so my books are like a week at least. I'm reading a book typically, unless I really, really love it and I'm just curled up with it for hours and hours. So yeah.
Okay. I have a question for you though,
reasons.
as a person who also has ADHD. So one
Yeah.
of the things I have listened to audiobooks before, right? It's not like I've never listened to them. I listen sometimes to podcasts, although not often, which I know is kind of ironic.
You
But
listen to ours though.
I do. Okay.
Yeah.
Yes, lots of editing. One of the things that I struggle with is when I am listening to, let's say, an audiobook as I'm driving or like doing a chore or something. What happens for me is I am distracted by what's happening around me, right? So if I'm like cleaning my bathroom and I'm listening to an audiobook, oh, what is this weird spot in my shower? Where did that come from? How can I get this off the wall? You know, and then I'm like, then I realize I haven't actually been listening for the last 4 minutes, and then I have to go back. Or if I'm driving, I'll pass something on the side of the road that gets me thinking about a store I need to go to, and I need to. So does that happen to you, or are you like locked in?
No, it totally happens to me.
Okay.
I think it is good, like training for my brain though,
Okay.
where it's like, it's trying to stay connected to the book. And if the book is boring, like it's not going to, right? So if I'm really interested in the book, my brain will stay on the book. But yes, of course. Yeah. I get distracted.
Okay.
Or Cesario will talk to me and I'm like, why are you talking to me?
Okay. I was just curious because I have found the only podcasts I can listen to and the only audiobooks that I can listen to successfully are ones that have really strong narratives that are like really easy to follow and that are like, suspenseful, gripping, hold my attention. If it's just like people chit-chatting like in a podcast, or if it's like us, or if it's just like a story that's really meandering or taking its time, I'm like, I'm gone. I can only listen to thrillers on an audiobook.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's got to really grab me. Otherwise, I'm gone for sure. Okay, next question. And this is mainly for you since I don't really listen to audiobooks a lot, but like, what do you think are some of the benefits of audiobooks?
I mean, I think I kind of went over them just a minute ago.
Well, you mentioned the multitasking.
But yeah, you can be multitasking when you're reading, listening to a book, and do something else. I think that's going to be extremely important whenever we're able to have children, because like, I'm like, when am I ever going to read again? Only going to be listening to audiobooks, I bet. So that's just like something I think about for the future too. But thinking about accessibility, we talked about students. Like, we have students that listen to audiobooks rather than actually reading text, because there can be many reasons for this, but just like slow processing, they just have a disability where it's harder to actually read things rather than listen to things. And so, yeah, I know, like, I have a student who just like really, really struggles with their ADHD and can't focus, like sit down and focus on a text. And you put physical disabilities on here, but that's something also to like keep in mind. Like, if someone can't physically like potentially like hold up a book or like, you know, have something in front of them like that, audiobooks would be a great way to access books.
Yeah, absolutely.
For all those reasons. And then one of the things that I really love about audiobooks is the narrator can be very talented or make the book like very, very bad. So they have the ability to do that and to like shift you into this world. And we'll talk a little bit about some of my recommendations and like ones I've loved. And then finally, like thinking about I don't know why these things happen, but like there's mental blocks to reading, right? Just like there's mental blocks to many other things. And sometimes it's really hard to get into a book, and people call that a reading slump when you are struggling to read. And I think couple of things that help me, and one of them is including reading an audiobook, and because the story is going to continue whether or not you are like, you know,
turning the pages.
It's exactly I'm like trying to like describe this, because if you're sitting down, for
Mm-hmm.
me, if you're sitting down with a book and you're like,
Mm-hmm.
feeling that reading slump and
Yeah.
trying to sluggishly get your way through, you're
Yeah.
not going to be very successful at it,
Mm,
and at least in my case.
true.
And so audiobooks help the story continue, even if I
Mm-hmm.
am in a slump, and it helps me get
Yeah.
out of it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's another benefit that I
Yeah.
have noticed of reading audiobooks.
And I would say my one benefit from the times that I have used it, and this is like so basic and obvious, but like traveling, right? Which you kind of already talked about with multitasking.
Yeah.
Like you've got
Mm-hmm.
a long road trip. I used to drive from New Jersey to Ohio on the holidays
Oh,
back when I lived in New
yes.
Jersey. It's,
Oh my
like eight,
God.
9 hours. And it was perfect audiobook length. I'd find a great thriller that was, 8 hours long and would just listen to the whole thing in one go. So
Nice.
I think that's, yeah, it's also just really convenient for commutes and
Oh
long
God, yeah.
drives, etc.,
Mm-hmm.
which you've already touched on. And that's how,
Yeah.
yeah, that's how I use them. So you were going to share, since you do listen to audiobooks, you were going to share some of your recommendations for audiobooks that you've
Mm-hmm.
really enjoyed and also where you like to listen to your audiobooks because there's so many platforms, there's so many subscription
Oh,
services that people can
100%.
utilize. So did you want to?
Yeah. So the big difference between various books is that you can have one narrator or multiple narrators for various characters
Mm-hmm.
throughout the book. And so I tend to prefer multiple narrators for a book, but not necessarily exclusively, but they're
Mm-hmm.
fun. They can be really, really
Mm-hmm.
fun. But then again, there are, and I'll share an example of this, there are books where the narrator will create different
Voices.
voices for
Yes,
each
yeah.
character who are
Yeah.
like extremely talented. And
Mm-hmm.
one of those narrators is Daniel Henning, and
Okay.
he narrates The House in the Cerulean Sea by TJ Klune. And he does such a good job. Like, you've read this book, there's 6 different kids in it, and all of them have different voices, and it is
Mm.
so stinking adorable. Daniel does a really, really great job of distinguishing the voices of the characters.
Yeah.
That's why I loved that book, is because I
Yeah.
I listened to it. I didn't read it.
Mm-hmm.
And now I'm in the second book, and I'm reading it now, and I
Mm-hmm.
can hear their voices like coming off the page. It's so fun.
I said two things. One of the things you just said,
Yeah.
you said, I listened to it, I didn't read it. And I was like, oh, it's interesting that she made that distinction on her own. Like,
Well,
so clearly, clearly
but
she thinks
also
there's
you
a
will
distinction.
find that in this episode, I have said read and listened to interchangeably. So
But it was just funny that you felt the need to make that distinction when to you they're the same. But anyhow, no, the other thing I was gonna say, look at your face.
oh
The other
my
thing I
God,
was gonna
Amanda.
say. So as a theater person, there's a form of theater called readers theater, which you might
Mm,
be familiar with. And it's literally just
okay.
people on a stage with a script. There's no set, there's no blocking or anything. And you're just
Mhm.
reading the scripts and the different characters and they're reading the stage directions and
Yeah.
everything. And that's what it makes me think of. And I'm like, oh, I think I would really like that. I think I would really enjoy it because it's almost more of a performance in a way,
Oh, totally.
having like
100%.
the multiple voice
Yeah.
actors. Yeah.
So that was really fun. And I
Mhm.
would say, even though I wasn't a huge fan of the book itself or the series itself,
Mhm.
the Atlas 6 series, all 6 of them have a
Mhm.
different narrator. And
Mm.
it's just great to be able to distinguish between all of the characters
Yeah,
in
it's
such
helpful.
a way. When you're moving from character to character to
Mhm.
character, you know exactly who's speaking. And actually, Daniel Henning is a narrator in this book, not of one of the 6, but he is the character Gideon in this book. It's funny because there are very popular narrators, right?
Mhm.
And so you'll see them in various books.
Oh, sure. That makes sense.
Yeah, yeah. And so
I also
that was
I like
funny.
also like it when folks will read their own books. So like if a
Oh,
celebrity wrote a
yeah.
memoir. So
Mhm.
I think I mentioned this. I listened to like Tina Fey's I think it was Tina Fey's memoir. And that was just really interesting to hear her words in her voice. I know, Trevor Noah reads Born a Crime, and
Yeah.
that's another really popular audiobook. So
I
I do enjoy
think
that like very much. I think one of the things I haven't done yet, which I would like to do, is to listen to an audiobook that is voiced by like actors. Like I know there's some, famous actors who will lend their talents to the audiobook world. I'm like, that would be really cool to see them perform like in that format as well.
Yeah. The other book that I listened to that was a memoir was The Spare. Did you see that book
I
by
didn't.
Prince Henry?
Oh, yes,
It
but
was
no, I
so
did.
funny. I got really obsessed with the monarchy essentially after I went and saw Six, the musical.
Oh, yeah, yeah, of course.
Anyway, I dove deep and ended up listening to The Spare.
Gotcha.
And Prince Henry actually is narrating that. And so, yeah, I really
Oh.
love that too, especially if there's a memoir and
Yeah.
the author, right, is narrating. That's
Yeah.
fun too.
Yeah.
To let everybody know, like I listen mostly through Libby, which is the free app through libraries in our area. I think that's really, I feel like it's nationwide. I
It
feel like
is.
I've
It is.
heard
Yeah,
it
it is.
quite a bit. I don't know if it's in other countries though, but
Mm.
at least in the United States, it's connected to libraries. And so
Mhm.
you can not only listen to audiobooks, but you can also get Kindle like books on there as well.
Ebooks.
Ebooks, thank you. And I actually have not figured out how to connect it to my ebook, which I have a different
Oh,
one
like
than
your e-reader,
Kindle.
you mean?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, thank you. What is it called? Oh my gosh, I don't even know. Kobo.
Okay.
So I have Kobo.
Okay.
I don't know how to connect Libby to Kobo yet. I'll figure it out sometime. But the thing with Libby is like, especially in the Seattle area, it gets so packed. You have to wait a long time for
Yeah.
books. And
Yep.
right now I am rereading Powerless, which you are 100% going to read and hate, but it's going to be so
Yes, so I've
fun.
heard.
I'm so excited. I freaking love this book,
I
and
know.
it's the characters in it and it's the tension in it, and you are gonna hate it.
Wait, okay, pause for a second though, because you've said this multiple times now.
Yeah.
What am I gonna hate about it?
It's a romance.
Oh, is that the only reason I'm gonna hate it? Just because it's a
You're gonna
romance?
hate it, and it's I think you're gonna hate it. I'm not gonna tell you exactly
Okay,
why,
okay,
because I
okay.
want
That's
you to
fine.
like make your
Okay,
own
all
thing.
right,
But
okay,
I
all
know
right.
you're going to. Like I just know, because it's not like amazing writing.
Oh.
Okay. The reason why you were okay with Court of Thorns was because like Sarah J. Maas does a good job and she's a good writer, right? This is not like
Oh
wonderful writing.
dear. Okay. Okay.
But it's so fun.
Face. Oh my god, just evil.
Yeah. So
Okay.
I also have a Spotify subscription. And if you are the head, like Spotify, I don't know what that's called,
Account holder.
holder,
Owner.
then you are able to access like audiobooks. And so I do that
so
through
sad.
Spotify, and I listen to all sorts of audiobooks. Sometimes audiobooks can be boring. And one of the ones that is boring that I recently read, but also Sasadio wanted me to read this because I said, if you read Akatar, I'll read one of your books. And he wants me to read The Road. And I don't even know like who
by
this
Cormac
person is.
McCarthy?
Yeah. Did you read it?
Nope. It has been on my list for a long time and I keep bumping it down because I'm like, I know it's good, but I just don't want to read it.
Is it good though? I don't know.
I don't know. I don't know because I
So
haven't read it.
the narrator in there, I think, actually ruins the book for me because his voice is boring and I really can't stand it. And I was like, why? He narrates the whole thing. There's a boy in the book too. And so he creates this really annoying voice for the boy. And I'm just like, I can't stand this.
That's unfortunate.
So the other thing though that is worth mentioning is the speed that you listen to your audiobooks on. This is another thing that kind of like circulates around TikTok. I currently have it at, let me look real quick. It's like 1 something. Yeah, it's at 1.5. And some people will listen to like 3.
That's crazy.
It's insane. And it's so funny because I'll listen to this out loud sometimes. And my father-in-law was here last week and he was like, are they talking fast on there? Other people who have not been like accustomed to reading that way, they're like, what the frick is happening? Because they do. They're like, blah, 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 blah.
Oh God, that'd be so hard, especially for someone who struggles like me to process things like in that format. it would be so difficult. Like I
You
can read like that. Like I can read like blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, you can.
Like that's how fast I read.
You can't
But
listen
I
that fast.
cannot listen that fast. Like I would have to be so honed in. And I think the other thing with
Yeah.
audiobooks is like, and this is true for e-readers too, which is why ideally I like an actual book to hold, is because it's you can't go back easily. It's not like you can easily flip
Oh,
back
yeah.
to that page to check something or go back and look at like if there's a map, look at the map at the beginning of the
Yeah.
book or check. So I find it very limiting too.
I would say that's probably the biggest con of like reading
Mm-hmm.
or not an ebook, an audiobook,
Yeah.
is because you can't go back. You're like,
Yep.
oh, when was that?
Yep.
What chapter was that? You don't know.
Mm-hmm.
It's very
Yeah.
hard. It's very difficult.
Yeah. Yeah.
So even like if I'm listening to an audiobook for our podcast, like I have
Mm-hmm.
to open a notes page and be like, what do I remember? And like plug it
Yeah.
in because I'm not going to remember
Yeah. You can't
like dog ear it. I
text it or
don't do it
anything.
in that
Yeah.
moment. But also the hard thing is sometimes I'm driving. And so that's not possible.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, like again, I have so much respect for and I'm so impressed by people who are good at that and can hold all that information and can track
Yeah.
things for that long. And we read a book. I mentioned this on the podcast a couple of weeks ago. We read In the Dream House by Carmen Maria Machado, and there's a ton of like footnotes in it. And I remember asking some
Oh.
of my fellow book clubbers who had listened to it, I'm like, how did that
Mm.
work? How did they read? Did they read the footnotes? And how
Oh,
did
I
they do
see.
that? Like, did they insert it in the middle of a sentence when the number was there? And
Mm-hmm.
so, like, it really throws me.
And
Like,
what did they do? Did they
they
even read
said
them?
the folks who read the audiobook said that the narrator did read the footnotes, but they didn't
Oh.
say how they did it. And there were
Mm-hmm.
things that they had missed. So I'm not even sure if they read like all of the footnotes or only some of them but
Mm-hmm.
either way, it's just like things like that because of the way that a page is laid out and the way that text
Right.
works on a page it's different. And so like
Mm-hmm.
your experience of the text can be different. Again, if you're not looking at a map, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
how does that work in a fantasy book when there's a map? Like, they're not reading the map to you. So
Right.
you just don't have that information,
You
right?
just
You
don't
don't
have that
have that.
information. Yeah.
I'm assuming they read through character lists
You can
and
like
list
look it
all the
up.
names and stuff. I'm sure. Or
No, I
no.
don't think so. No.
So you don't have like the okay. So yeah, a text does operate a bit differently. And so yeah, so there's pros and cons to both, right? Like
Yeah.
for
And it's
sure.
funny, like I remember reading, there was a book you recommended
Hmm.
that you ended up not having me read after all
Okay.
I think it's by Geraldine Brooks. The first one that you
Oh
recommended.
yes, yeah.
What one was
It was
that?
this song. Oh my gosh.
Whatever that one was.
I'll look, yeah, it's
That one was
the
so
song. Yeah.
confusing. And I was like, what the fuck is this book about? And then
Uh-huh.
eventually I was like, okay, yeah, he's in a desert or something. And I was like, okay,
Uh-huh.
there's this guy. Oh, what's his name? I don't know. I don't know his name.
Oh, the
And
secret
it's like
chord. That's what it was. The
this.
secret
Okay.
chord.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That one was so confusing as an audiobook. I was like, what the
Yeah,
fuck?
some of them just don't work in that format, which kind of makes sense though, right? If something was created for a particular
Yeah.
format and operates a certain way, it can be hard sometimes to translate. That's why like when a book is made into a movie, you're like, oh, like some of this works, some of this had to change
Yeah.
because it doesn't work in this format. Like those things matter. And I think it's important to note that.
Yeah. The ones that had footnotes, was that historical fiction?
No, the In the Dream House is a memoir.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. It
Mm.
was a very interesting style, the way that she wrote it. Cause she was playing around with like
Oh,
different
yeah. That's what you
conventions
said.
and tropes,
Mhm.
which again, it's like, oh, that's interesting to think about how that translates from one medium, one format into
Mhm.
another.
Mhm.
And I think is actually part of this conversation. We didn't really talk about in the first question, but things operate differently in different formats. And so
Mhm.
it does change in some ways, small and sometimes large, the ways that you understand something or interact with something.
Mhm.
And
Like,
again, I think yeah, a good example is taking a book and making it a movie. It's not the same, and that's
sure.
why you get a lot of criticism from people who read the book, like, but this changed and
Mhm.
this wasn't the same. And it's
Yeah,
like, yeah, but
yeah.
you can't do this.
Mhm.
You don't have internal dialogue a lot of times in movies.
Oh,
Like you
yeah,
can have people like the
exactly.
voiceovers, but it's like it's not
Right.
there.
Yeah.
And that changes your understanding of a character and how you respond.
And
Anyhow.
even in just thinking about the one that I mentioned, the house in the Cerulean Sea, like my experience of that is completely different from yours and how I interacted with the children and the characters.
Yeah.
Just because their personalities had like a different layer to them. Right. And it's a different experience. So yeah. The one thing before we end this episode is there is this new phenomenon becoming kind of popular on TikTok where it's called immersion reading or immersive reading, where you listen to the book and have the physical book in front of you. So you're doing both at the same time.
Okay. Seems like overkill.
Oh God. I tried this out with the sequel to This House in the Cerulean Sea. I can't even remember what it's called. I was listening to it and reading it, and I liked it mostly, but I don't have time for that. If I'm listening to an audiobook, I'm listening to it so I can do other things. And so it didn't feel like it was worth it to
I don't get
and reading at the same time. But if anyone has recommendations out there, you let me know and I will try it out.
Did they say why people like it?
So for this other book that I'm listening to right now, but read prior, I could see they have different narrators for the two main characters. And so like hearing their voices along with reading, I think could be really cool. I could see that. But yeah, I don't know why.
Okay.
It's just a new thing.
It's weird because I'm like, if you're listening, it's like, oh, the narrators have different voices. I'm like, well, then just the audiobook would suffice. I don't know what the book would then add to that. But
yeah, I don't know.
I will have to look into this phenomena because I'm not familiar with it. And it seems
some people are really obsessed with it.
Yeah. It just seems like one of those things where it's like, it's doing the most, but it's not actually doing anything. So I will, I'm curious. If any of you guys in the audience, if any of our listeners, if you guys engage in this practice, I'm genuinely curious. I would love to know why you like it and like what the benefits are. Cause to me, it seems, I'm a little confused. So I would love to learn more. I'm very open to learning more about that. Cool. Do you have any final thoughts about audiobooks that absolutely you need to get off your chest, Kelsey?
I feel like we went over them. And if you haven't listened to an audiobook and have been curious about it, you should definitely go check them out.
Yeah. And again, the audiobooks that I've listened to, I've really enjoyed. It's just not something is part of my regular reading practice, but I have nothing against them. And I don't know, the more I talk to you, Kelsey, the more I'm like, maybe I should incorporate audiobooks into my routine. I don't have a super long commute, but like, I don't know.
You kind of do, isn't it? At least 20 minutes?
Yeah, to me, that's not long considering what it used to be. That's so short. And I also think it would take me forever to get through an audiobook if I'm listening to it in 20 minute chunks. But maybe not. I guess if it's shorter and I'm listening to it on 2 times speed.
But then if you're interested in the book, then you'll find ways to listen to it. That's what happens.
That's true. Because I want to know it's the same with podcasts that I've gotten into. I'm like, all right, I just need to like sit in my car and finish this episode. Cool. So to wrap things up, I will just go over our socials one more time for folks, since Kelsey did a wonderful job at the beginning. So Instagram,
I do my best.
You did so good. Instagram at litvibesonly_podcast. TikTok is Lit Vibes Only Podcast, as is our YouTube channel, Lit Vibes Only Podcast. If you are feeling the need to communicate with us via email, you can shoot us an email at litvibesonlypodcast@gmail.com. But in general, like, we want to hear from you, especially with these episodes, like the lit chats, where we're just kind of talking about our thoughts on a topic. We both want to learn more. We both want to learn more about these topics. We want to know if you enjoy this format of episodes. Basically, talk to us. We're lonely. Come chat with us. We would love to hear from you.
We have no friends. Wait, we got like 55 on TikTok, but that's it. So we need more.
70.
We need more. Come hang out with us.
Either way, come join us. Come join the club. Thank you so much for listening, y'all. And we'll see you next Monday.
See you next Monday. Bye.